Hello everyone. Today our topic of discussion is Canale and Swain model. Its relevance in English language teaching programs in West Bengal board schools. To understand the topic, we have to refer to the immediate source of the model. First, on a brief note, let us take a look at English language teaching. Learning a second language, apart from one's own mother tongue, has been important because of many reasons, like traveling, knowing other cultures, professional aspirations, trade, or some personal urges. Latin was the most popular language in the 16th century. Gradually, Latin as the most popular language gave way to the popularity of English language widely as a world language. Naturally, owing to its growth as a dominant choice in regional, national and international communication, the intricacies of English language learning gained even higher concern. With second language learning, the objectives of teaching the language equally becomes challenging to achieve the desired outcome of learning. In such a context, the purpose of learning English as second language is to develop competence in the language so that the learning can be applied in its real life situations with self-efficacy. Now the question is, what is competence? While discussing the topic, the flow of the topic would be goal of English language learning, and we have the works of reference, Noam Chomsky, with whom Del Hathaway Himes, Canale and Swain model, and the relevance of Canale and Swain model in ELT programs in West Bengal board schools. Noam Chomsky introduced the concept of linguistic competence and linguistic performance. Linguistic competence, as described by Chomsky, refers to an ideal system of language. Now, native speakers of a language possess this system. According to this system, linguistic knowledge by the native speakers enables them to speak infinite number of sentences out of a finite set of words. Linguistic competence, according to Chomsky, is the tacit knowledge by the native speakers who have internalized the implicit conventions and rules of a language system. While linguistic performance, according to Chomsky, is the actual utterances of these sentences. However, it was pointed here that the sociology of communication or the social linguistic role of language has been neglected in Chomsky's concept of competence and performance. It is here Del Hathaway Himes introduced the concept of communicative competence. Now, what is communicative competence? As we have mentioned, it was Himes who described or introduced the term communicative competence. And communicative means the rules of use without which the rules of grammar would be useless. And competence, according to Himes, is when to speak, when not to speak, what to speak or talk, whom to speak, talk, or when and where and in what manner. The two words carry an in-depth meaning on their own. English as a second language learning has the consequential purpose of communicating in different contexts. Gaining competence in English as L2 would enable the learners to understand English when spoken, that means listening, produce English, that means speaking, understand English when written, reading, and write in English. Such an ability to interpret and produce meaningful communication in accordance with the situation is the development of communicative competence in a learner. We have to understand that English is used here as a link language in a situation where the mother tongue or the regional language do not serve the purpose of communication. Himes talks about the importance of implicit and explicit knowledge of the rules of grammar, undoubtedly, but the socio-linguistic knowledge of the language is equally important. The learner needs to know what to speak and what not to speak in a situation, when to speak and when not to speak, whom to speak, where to speak, and most importantly, in what manner, that is, how to speak. According to Himes, how something is said is part of what is said. They are inseparable. Delheim's framework of the concept of communicative competence was further developed by Canale and Swain in 1980. Their initial model includes three main dimensions: grammatical competence, sociolinguistic competence, and strategic competence. Now, the question is, what is grammatical competence? It is the knowledge of morphology, lexis, or choice of vocabulary, word patterns, semantics, or the interpretation of words, signs, and structure. Correct knowledge of these would lead to the correct usage in a context. Sociolinguistic competence in communication refers to the knowledge of socio-cultural roles of language. It takes into consideration factors like age, gender, sex, or biological differences in communication process. For example, the way we speak or the vocabulary that we select while speaking to an elderly person would not be the same while we speak to our friends and colleagues. Strategic competence in communication refers to the knowledge of some strategic measures that are taken by the speaker to compensate the gaps or problems caused during communication. Now, what do we mean by these measures? What are these measures? These measures are the strategies like use of fillers, pauses, expressions, or minds that we use during communication to cope with the unexpected problems that come in between our communication process and hinder our communication. We take these measures because no ready-made solution is available to adjust the gaps in communication. To these three components, Canale and Swain revised and added a fourth component that in 1983. It is the discourse competence. Discourse competence is the knowledge and ability of ordering the actual utterances in terms of sequencing the ideas, paragraphs, cause and effect relationship, or thematic organization, logical ordering, intentionality of communication. And in absence of any of these standards, utterances will not be communicative. Now, discourse competence, as we have said, is the first and was the last one which was added in the revised model. It is the ability to combine the elements of a language to achieve coherence in form and meaning, link individual sentences and utterances so as to make it a complete whole. Thus, while we conclude, we can say that competence and performance are mutually related. Competence must be coupled with performance or actual utterance in a context. The social situations are the backdrop where competence and performance will function, which is also embedded in how we use the language. Whatever we have understood, whatever we have learned, the knowledge that we have gathered is valid only when we can apply them correctly in a situation, in a social situation. Finally, to answer the last part of the topic, we as language teachers need to analyze and evaluate if all these standards are met or not in English language teaching and learning communication classrooms, with particular reference to schools that follow West Bengal Board curriculum. Now, while we talk about the last part or the relevance of Canale and Swain's model in English language teaching program in West Bengal Board schools, here are some suggestions to verify the parameters on the basis of which the relevance is to be measured. First, we need to delimit the context to schools where the English is taught as a second language in a West Bengal Board. Next, relevance of the methods that is followed in teaching learning English as a second language. How the methods, what the methods are, how they are followed, whether the methods that are followed are applicable or not, or if not, then what are the problems that the language teachers face. These we have to keep in mind. Problems and barriers in learning English as L2, especially in rural areas, because in semi-urban and rural areas, there are certain problems, the local problems, which might hinder the learning of a language, especially if it comes to learning English. Problems and barriers in teaching English as L2, and with the same context in the semi-urban and rural areas. Because the problems and barriers that a language teacher faces while teaching English in rural and semi-urban areas may widely differ than those who teach in the urban areas, Next, whether the components that has been mentioned under Canale and Swen's model in 1980, the 3 components, and those which were modified and added in 1983, the 4th one, are these components achieved during learning and teaching of English as second language? Whether the grammatical competence, the social-linguistic competence, the strategic competence, and the discourse competence. What are the problems or what are the learning barriers in case of the learners who come from a rural or a semi-rural background? Next, student-teacher relationship, which is very important in any context. Now, and the approaches to overcome the problems and barriers and strengthen the existing positive factors. By this is meant that we already have some existing positive factors in the classroom situations or in the teaching learning process itself. Now, the positive factors which we already have, or the existing ones, are to be strengthened so that the learners are motivated or the teachers are motivated to contribute to the process and overcome the barriers in a cooperative and a collaborative way. Relevance in terms of real-life applications of these components. Relevance in terms of real-life applications of these components indicate whatever the language learning has taken place in a classroom situation, are these learning applicable or can be applied in real life by the learners. So what is that relevance? Based on all these parameters, we have to judge whether the Canale and Swen method or the model is relevant in West Bengal board schools when it particularly comes to the teaching of English as a second language. Finally, when you move on with the topic, please concentrate that you do not forget to add your own comments and the suggestive measures to improve the process. What measures can be taken so that we can improve on the entire process of teaching and learning and the application of the components mentioned under Canale and Swain model. The last 2 slides of the PowerPoint attached to this topic provide some ideas to critically reflect and analyze the parameters that are suggested to justify the perspectives. Thank you.